Black Hat, Jeff Moss.
It's gonna get louder. We're gonna get stronger. We're gonna feel better. You can't tame this energy.
Hey, welcome to Black Hat Europe 2022. Right on. Sorry for the construction out front. I'm told we'll have it all fixed up by next year, be a little bit smoother. And anyway, I'm just really excited to be here. I've been living in Singapore and not a whole lot of in-person events until maybe 3 months ago. Formula One came, and then it was on. Like, everything is booked all the time, and it really feels like we're making up for lost time. So, for those of you who are new to Black Hat, what I normally do is talk a little bit about who's here, because we get a pretty impressive array of attendees from around the world. And the idea, too, is while most of us are pretty established in our careers, there's a lot of people constantly trying to come in, trying to figure out what's going on. And so to help the next generation of InfoSec, we do scholarships and ways to allow students and other people to come here for free to really just get their toe in the door and learn a little bit about what's going on. And hopefully they'll stick around. We won't scare them away. We'll be welcoming. And then next thing you know, you'll be working with new colleagues. So how many people are here? Well, we have people from over 114 countries. That's a lot of countries. I remember when we were happy if we had 20 countries represented. Now we're into the triple digits. And we have 94 scholarships that we gave away. And so if anybody is in the room that got one of those scholarships, please raise your hand. Somebody, yes, excellent, thank you. Let's give them a round of applause for... It can be somewhat intimidating having to apply for something like that, but then you made it. Welcome. Hopefully I'll run into you, and I'm looking forward to any conversations like where you came from, how you discovered us, what you're hoping to learn. Okay, so I have a couple of comments before I introduce our keynote, Daniel, today. And in the past, I've spoken a little bit about complexity and how we're in a situation where, like, by show of hands, who here thinks your network or your environment is going to become more complex next year? Show of hands. Who thinks you're as complex as you'll ever be, and it's just going to be a steady state of complexity? Like 0. Who thinks things are going to get less complex in the future? 2 people, 3 people. So we're kind of in this ever complex, outsourced, third-party, distributed, like unknown scenario. And then on the other side, speed. Speed is getting time. It's getting shorter and shorter. How long does it take to build a network connection? How long does it take to detect malware? How many people here, by show of hands, if you report, how many people have on your dashboard something based on time? Right? Time to detect, time to remediate, right? Time to respond. Now the interesting thing about time, unlike complexity is just forever increasing, in my estimation. Just look at ChatGPT. That's just going to make your life more complicated. Trying to determine how much confidence ChatGPT had in each little statement it made. It'd be great to have a bias score that tells you. But time eventually can reach 0. I mean, it just can't keep getting smaller forever. There's theoretical limits. So with that in mind, you actually have a little bit of control over time. You can decide how much time is acceptable to do a backup? How much time is acceptable to test a backup? How much time should it take to deploy a new employee, to provision a new employee? Right? You can control that. You've lost an employee. How long to offboard the employee and remove them from all of your Active Directory, and deprovision their laptop, and all of that stuff, right? You can measure that, and it can be on a metric, and that is within your control. But then you talk to people and you ask questions like, how many people here, well, we all agree that control over your TLS certificates, your online web identity, are pretty important. By a show of hands, who monitors certificate transparency logs and knows within a certain number of minutes or hours that your certificate might be used somewhere else outside of your control? Does anybody monitor the CT logs to see that your certificates are stolen and in use somewhere? Wow, I don't think anybody. Okay. How many people monitor, say, your DKIM records for SendMail, your mail-to record? And this is when the giant email providers will say, hey, we've detected people trying to send mail as your domain, but we know it's not you because you have a signed DKIM record. So we're just giving you a heads up. Here's all the people trying to impersonate you. And you can use it to detect phishing attacks. And you get those all the time. Does anybody monitor those mail-to DKIM records? Okay, a couple people. That's good. And so the idea is you have all these ways to detect something bad is happening to your enterprise. And you can determine, do I check once a day? Do I check once a minute? How often do I update my malware signatures? And the other thing we can do with time is we know that people have better engagement the less time they wait for an answer. So for example, if you file, I don't know, a complaint, if you file a misuse or an abuse report to a company or a bug report, and you don't hear back from 2 weeks, chances are you're not maybe going to file another bug report with them. But if you hear back the next day, hey, that was great, thanks for the report, we have these questions, let's open a dialogue. Well, now you've got somebody on your side. They know you're responsive. The bug finder wants to interact with you, right? That time decrease lent to not only them becoming your advocate, they're going to tell their friends, hey, they're really responsive, right? That increases your security by just answering your email faster. You don't even have to have the answer for them. You can just say, hey, we got your email, it's in the queue, here's a number, contact me if you have questions. What I'm getting at is we can use time in so many ways to help our enterprises. And if you think about it, a lot of harm that's done online can be reduced if we only act faster. Disinformation, misinformation, malinformation, these are classic cases, right? The longer dis, and malinformation spreads, the more harm it does. Anything you can do to reduce the spread or the amplification or respond faster reduces the harm. The sooner you can remove an abuser out of your community, you reduce harm. Right? These are things that you get multiple paybacks by acting faster. So I would hope that you, for your enterprise, you'd have sort of a sheet, and you'd say, you know what, this quarter we're focusing on reducing this timeline. We're never going to get it to a day to do a restore of a backup. But you know what, if we get ransomed, and we know we can restore from backup in 2 days, and we know we can string them along on the negotiations for 3 days, we've got some options. If our backup restoration fails, we can still always pay the ransom. I don't advise that, but you now have options. But if it takes you 5 days to do the restoration and they can pay off the ransom in 3 days, all of a sudden your leadership starts thinking maybe we should pay the bad guys some money. But if you can restore faster and give them some confidence around that, you can take that money out of the pocket of the bad guy and get your enterprise back up and running faster. So anyway, I just want you to think about the good that you can do by thinking about time. And and this is how much it's pervaded our industry. You know, the OODA loop. Everybody's heard of the OODA loop. Observe, orient, decide, act. The faster you can observe, orient, decide, or act, the faster you are able to spin that cycle. The faster you spin the cycle, the more you could be ahead of an adversary. High frequency trading, all about time. But we also reward people who fail fast. You want to be a fast follower. You want to move fast and break things. You know, there's missed opportunity costs for being slow. You want to be first to market. We generally reward people first to market. And it's something, again, you can measure. So if you have to fill out something on your performance evaluation, put something on a dashboard, I encourage you to think about time. And ultimately, you can use time to evaluate how well your company is performing. What's your retention rate? How long do people stick around? How much vacation time do you get? So again, while complexity leaves me in a very depressing place, thinking about it ever expanding, time has got me pretty excited because everything I do that I've spoken about that we do, I bet I can shrink the time again. I bet there's 25 to 30%. I can tighten everything up. That'd be great. Whether I just get more alerts, okay. So think about time. Now, it is my privilege to introduce today's keynote. Daniel Cuthbert, a man that needs no real introduction if you've been paying attention to Twitter. He's highly contributory to the industry. One of my passions is classic cars, so I love watching his work on restoring his classic cars, reconstructing things that were sort of unreconstructible. And then in the information security space, he puts a lot of time in on the Black Hat Review Board and has been recently named a member of the United Kingdom's first cyber advisory board, government cyber advisory board. So he's got some pretty interesting perspectives. And today he's been thinking a lot about how could we go about constructing a more defensible internet. So with that in mind, it's my privilege to introduce Daniel Cuthbert.
Good morning. It's very cool to see a lot of people here with legs. We've not seen that for a while. I'm pretty much done with Teams. But it's also quite cool to see the freakers, the hackers, the breakers, the builders, the malware writers, the criminals, the intelligence people, the military people. And we are in a really cool industry. Let's be brutally honest, right? If this was an accounting conference, I don't think we'd have this. But when I was looking at doing this keynote, and you go through the initial phases of pure fear when Steve told me I was at BrewCon, and at first I thought I was being fished. And I was like, what? Like, you want me to do what? No, that's rubbish. And then you go through the panic stages, and then you go through the imposter stages, which is something that has consumed me. But I got 3 bits of advice of how to do a keynote. The first was, by Reg, drink a lot of water. If it goes really bad, piss yourself. Okay? Next one is imagine everybody naked. And then finally, Grifter yesterday said, they're all your friends. I'm like, God, this is really conflicting because I don't want to imagine any of my friends naked. But I've got water, all right? So this could go either way. But I think because we're friends, we need to talk about the fact that we have a slight problem in this industry. And the fact is that it's a cool industry, right? I've been very privileged to be a big part of this industry for a very long time, coming up to nearly 30 years of hacking. But at the same time, I've started to see how my industry and my friends and what we're doing have moved away from that core group of curious kids doing stuff on the internet and eventually the World Wide Web to how external forces are now taking what we're doing and kind of causing a lot of havoc. But at the same time, like, our industry is still seen by others as damn near cool. Like, we've had amazing movies made about us, war games, sneakers. We've had phenomenal TV shows like Mr. Robot. We've had some pretty crap ones like that Disney-inspired hackers thing, but we won't talk about that because that was just a weird phase of the world. But at the same time, we've also had agencies that love to listen. Not necessarily in a good way, but they love to listen and watch. And Sir Jeremy Fleming, who's like Chief Spook, talked about it at a conference the other month where he's saying that due to the current global economic situation, there needs to be a drive to make the UK the safest place to do business. And technology has all of a sudden meant that it's an area for people who want to be able to manipulate and do bad things, but also a battleground for values. And that message resonated with me a lot because at the moment, it seems that the hacking world, this information security world, like a lot of people are now interested, but not necessarily in the best way. So this year, NCSC did their annual review, and interestingly enough, there were 63 ransomware incidents that warranted a Cobra meeting. And what that means is it's serious enough that government's got to get involved and go, what are we going to do about it? And that kind of took me on a journey as to, where are we going? So I started breaking stuff in the early parts of the internet. So in 1994, we moved to South Africa. Back then, there was about 7 million internet users. And it was a great period of doing stuff. And interestingly, I was doing some digging about my first ever email address, which was dan@pix.za. It was a group set up an ISP that basically allowed a couple of lines, and it was really basic. And they had 2 experimental features, Gopher and this thing called the World Wide Web, which makes me sound like a right old fart. But it was cool, because that was my gateway drug. That was the curiosity thing that said, hey, what can we do here? But throughout my entire career, I feel we've become obsessed and we worship the altar of calc.exe. And that's become somewhat of an obsession that has become rather abused. Now, there's nothing wrong with the offensive world. Indeed, it's been a big part of my life, breaking into stuff, it's fun, popping shells and shit, everybody did that. But the reality is there's been a sinister move towards this obsession with calc.exe. Now, like Jeff said, I sit on the Blackout Review Board. It's an immense privilege for me. I get to spend a lot of time looking at the amazing research that all the researchers do. I go to a lot of talks. But there was one talk that was almost my come to Jesus moment, and that was in 2017 by a good friend of mine, Halvar Flake, where he, notoriously good at finding bugs, reverse engineering, did a talk where he said, we're not really building a defendable internet. And that talk really rammed home and made me look about what I was doing and what we, the industry, were doing. Now, just a bit about these slides, I decided to do a keynote. I'm going to hand sketch all my slides. I'm also going to use AI. So everybody looks like an 18th century portrait. Some of them worked out really well. Some of them blame the AI. I also, because everybody in the industry was using ChatGPT last week, I thought, what the hell, let's do my keynotes on ChatGPT. And the bloody computer made it better than I could ever do. So it's going to be an interesting ride. But Halvar's talk concentrated on one main theme. The fact of the matter is, we are incapable of building a secure internet. And I thought, this is interesting because I want to explore why we've got some of the most intelligent people in the world in this industry. Can we not build something that's secure? Now, my dad's a traditional engineer, builds mines and all that big heavy stuff. And he's always joked at me you lot call yourselves computer engineers, but you can't build anything. My machine's always breaking. Seriously, stop calling yourselves that. It's always sat with me. I'm like, but we can build stuff. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to prove Halvar wrong. We stand on the shoulders of many giants in this industry. He's one of them, and I'm going to be ballsy enough to say, you know what, Halvar? Yeah, wrong. Rubbish. 2017 was a long time ago. Now, if we use the logic like dog years, so for every year, a dog year has 7 years, I feel the same in the internet. Right? So 5 years is a very, very long period of time. But what Halvar talked about was that when we look at buying products, and when we look at buying software and everything else, the reality is that we have zero input to make sure that those vendors, those products are secure, because we just don't have that power. And actually, we have no meaningful influence. Now, if we step back, so the early part of the late 90s and the early 2000s, and when we were building a lot of the stuff, one of my first jobs was I was hired as a security engineer. There was no pen testing industry at the time, but my job was to break stuff for the Financial Times, and we were building FT.com. Now, we had these cool things called web servers. Well, actually, it was Lotus Notes. But they had web servers, and they had this new database that was completely unbreakable, they told us. It was really cool. And you did what most security people did back at the time. You have networks. We understood the networking problem, so we needed to secure these web servers. So what did everybody do? They went out and bought firewalls. This was like job compliance checkbox, right? Pre the CISO role sort of being there. Until it dawned upon a lot of people that, well, with a firewall, you need port 80 open. So that firewall is a hunk of junk doing absolutely nothing. So do you know what popped up out of that as the knee-jerk reaction? We need a web application firewall. We need a product to fix the product that we bought that was really insecure, but then as everybody knew that the web application firewalls were being bypassed at an alarming rate. So now you have lots of problems. So you've got lots of bits of plastic and stuff where you're trying to work out how do we fix this. And indeed, that was a big part of how a lot of the security tools in our industry grew up. Knee-jerk reactions to the fact that a product that you wanted to rely on was not built securely. So we had to then go and get another product to pay for the product that wasn't built securely and hope to God that that product did the job. And then this offensive community came out and tore apart that product. And it was like, oh, Jesus, what is going on? Here we are in 2022, and that problem still exists today. And this was one of the main arguments that Halvar was saying, is that we as a collective have a hell of a lot more power than anybody realizes. Because we can go to certain vendors to say, why aren't you building stuff securely? Now, a big problem with a lot of the products that you see in the market today, especially security products, there are two main things. One, they're completely trivial to bypass by any attacking QA. They're also highly privileged with an immense attack surface. Nothing's really changed from the early 2000s. Now, you probably start to wonder, well, surely we can build secure stuff. And indeed we can. We did actually see a slight glimpse of that. QMail was the answer to SendMail. Are there any old SendMail administrators here? It's a bit like PTSD when you've dealt with SendMail. It's like an abusive partner that smacks you around the head all the time. That was SendMail, right? But it did a job. It moved mail on. It was never built for security. I mean, God knows anybody who ran SendMail, anybody who found bugs in SendMail, anybody who wrote exploits for SendMail and Perl. So what happened? 2007, Dan Bernstein decided, you know what, I'm tired of this. Like, we need this email thing for the internet. I'm going to build QMail. QMail was a radical change. You had the sendmail.cf, which was literally like how I imagined blind people drawing cartoons when it came to configurations. It was the most complex thing in the world, so nobody got it right, which means your mail servers were open, which means you had open relays, which means if you were sending out attacks, you just scanned the internet for open relays, and Bob's your uncle, and Fanny's your aunt, and everybody's good. And Dan was like, no, this is rubbish. We can do better than this. And he had three main ideas when he built QMail. One, eliminate bugs. Two, eliminate code. Three, eliminate trusted code. Bear in mind, this was 2007. What he meant by that was, we don't need massive, overly architectured code bases. Get rid of the code. On top of that, because you've got lots of code, you'll have lots of bugs. So if you eliminate the code, your bugs are reduced down. Third one, eliminate trusted, untrusted bits. And this is something we're struggling with. Now, for me, it all concentrated on the word bug. I wanted to run out here like Steve Ballmer did in the early 2000s, shouting developer, 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 and sweating a little bit, but developer, but with bugs. I love bugs. Bugs have made my career. I'm obsessive about bugs. I love bugs. I love how bugs are exploited. I love how the fact that a simple bug could cripple a nation. And indeed, if I go back through my history, we were young and dumb and we were doing silly things with bugs back in the day. I helped run one of the first exploit sites, hack.coza. And that was us sharing exploit code to anybody who wanted it. Because that's what you did, right? You found a vulnerability, you wrote exploit code, you shared it amongst your small group of friends, you then shared it with other friends, THC, TSO, whoever was doing it. Then when you're bored, you put it on a website and you shared it off, and who knows, who cares what happened, right? Because what's the worst that could happen with a bug? That was the early 2000s. And indeed, that was our mindset, because what was the worst that could happen? There was only a couple of million internet users. The internet was a passing fad, The problem is, that bug has changed. Now, has anybody here ever watched the amazing Nick Cage's Lord of War? The opening scene, it's a phenomenal movie. The opening scene is probably one of the best for me in that it shows the life and manufacturing of a bullet. From the raw material being created, put into the shell, gunpowder, bullet, loaded, inspected twice, put in a cabinet, shipped all around the world, dropped, picked up, put in a cabinet, finally loaded in a weapon, and then the final shot is that bullet being fired and it hitting somebody. For me, this is a good indication of how our obsession with bugs are now where they're at. Because the bugs that we find now are no longer just being shared amongst friends for shits and giggles. Those bugs have become big money. I live with a friend in Thailand called the Gruk, who did the infamous picture of him sitting in our favorite bar with a bag full of cash and Vibram 5-finger shoes, which is very weird, doing an article where he was acting as Nick Cage's Lord of War, an exploit broker. Because what happened around 2007, 2008 was that these bugs were now big money. Whereas before you were giving away bugs for free, because we were terrible at business, you're now talking hundreds of thousands. If it's a zero-click iOS Oday, you're looking at $1.5 million, $2 million. You're looking at stuff that is now life-changing because people wanted access to bugs. Why do they want access to bugs? Because they wanted access to data, to control, to manipulate. And that goes back to what Sir Jeremy said. It's like now, our industry has the potential with what we do to drastically change an outcome of how people think, how people act, and how countries operate. And that's quite scary. So I thought, right, I'm going to prove Halvar wrong. I think we're actually doing a lot here, right? So I looked at some of the people. This is Shara de Grupper, and she did an amazing tweet that I really loved. She said, we're in this highly educated industry with a lot of ego. We're so smart, so trained, so certified. But for some weird reason, it's Dave in accounting who's the failure. He's the reason for the breach, not us. Dave was my #1 line of defense. And it's so damn true. It's like, Dave in accounting, you're an idiot, right? You clicked on a link. Like, how dare you click on a link? Like, what is wrong with you? You're sitting on chairs right now. Have you noticed the chairs have not fallen? I don't know if you're holding them wrong, but it's not your fault if the chair fails, right? This is the mindset of our industry at the moment, in that we've become petrified of phishing. Now, phishing is nothing new. It's an incredibly old technique. I don't think there's many people in this room who've never done it before. But for me, phishing is a systematic problem of where we're at in this industry. In that you should be able to click on something and not have it push a reverse shell out to somebody else. Is it that hard to ask? But the problem is, rather than us saying to the manufacturers, hey, seriously, Microsoft, like, why in God's name have we got Mac OS in Office still in 2022? It's, you know what we need? We need phishing training. We need AI, ML. We need next-gen EDR. We need all these products to fix the problem that Dave in accounting is going to do something that he should be doing. Clicking on stuff, you're like, oh my God, what is going on? And that kind of led us into the problem where we're at today. So this is Ryan Nareen, great person to follow on Twitter. He tweeted a month and a bit ago, unfortunately this stat's now changed, is that there was another Oday out in the public. It was the 47th in the wild Oday discovered so far in 2022. And it seems like something's kind of shifted. Now, indeed, we did see a shift with COVID. Whilst most people were baking sourdough and doing everything else, we saw, especially on the review board, a lot of people tearing apart products and looking for bugs, because what else were you doing, right? But we also saw criminals do that. Now, the queen of all Oday is Maddie Stone. Like, I love Maddie, I really do. She does amazing work. And she started to really look at what is causing a lot of these Odays. So to give you some stats, in 2019, 32 zero-day was spotted in the wild. So peak lockdown. 2020, 30. Okay, it's gone down, we're doing all right. 2021, over 70. You're like, damn, okay. That's a lot of sourdough that wasn't baked. The problem is, I feel we've become almost too fixated on Odays. Odays are cool. There's Oday protection. Everybody talks about Oday like they've met this magical dual-headed monster before. But in reality, Odays are not the problem, because it's the lame attacks that are still getting done. And indeed, we've seen that because for some weird reason in the last 5 years, we made it okay for a bunch of Adidas-wearing gopniks to hold the world to ransom with ransomware. And for me, that blew my mind, because the reality is they turned criminality into such an amazing cash cow where even smaller groups are making 100 million. Conti and Revel, they were so ballsy, they were dropping $1 million as collateral on criminal forums to say, come and join us, we want insiders. Estimated $1 billion plus. Ransomware is not leaked. Ransomware doesn't use super secret Oday, doesn't need to. It uses phishing, it uses techniques and tactics that a lot of people will talk about on YouTube channels. They'll talk about with threat intelligence reports. They'll talk about with tools that people release, because they're very good at watching and listening. And what Maddie found was that in this year alone, a total of over 18 exploited bugs in the first half of 2022 were there because they weren't addressed properly by the vendors fixing those bugs. So now we've kind of shifted the process here, right? We've now got the fact that we're arming criminals at an alarming rate. That bloody Dave in accounting keeps on clicking on stuff. You've got vendors not fixing stuff over here. So you're like, okay, so surely there was like stuff out there that maybe warned us about this. And there was. Aleph 1 in 96 did an amazing paper, Smashing the Stack for Fun and Profit. I'm sure most of you have read it. It's 26 years old. But for more than a decade, a big chunk of the vulnerabilities out there have been memory safety vulnerabilities. So you're like, okay, that's part of our kryptonite. We suck at doing stuff with memory, right? Surely there's something we can do. I'm sure there's a product out there that can fix it. So if I look back at the last 5 years since Halvar did the talk, I'm like, oh, okay, this is not looking good. So I thought, fine. Last week, everybody was using ChatGPT. And make no mistake, I think ChatGPT is amazing. It's quite scary, especially when you hear like police departments like San Francisco want to arm dogs with initially guns. They did clarify that to, hey, calm yourself down. We're not going to put guns on a robot for crying out loud. It's just going to be explosives. Yesterday they said that might not happen, thank God. But imagine the time when you've got a robot with explosive guns that now makes use of AI to determine, hey, look at a crowd and decide if that crowd's doing bad things. It's not that far-fetched anymore. So I thought, right, I'm going to ask ChatGPT, let's see if I can build a Keynote. So I asked a couple of questions. One, do you think we'll see a secure internet? I swear to God, it laughed at me. I was like, okay. It was like, highly inconceivable. There needs to be a lot of factors that come into play. It's like, oh, damn you. So I was like, okay, next question. Do you think vendors are ever going to make secure products? Potentially. It used the word potentially. And it said, but it needed vendors to invest in security, invest in memory-safe languages, invest in training. So I'm like, oh, Jesus, we can't even get Dave in accounting to not click stuff. How are we going to do this? So if I had to do a little scorecard first up, I'm like, okay, I think I agree with Halvar. We're not building a defendable internet. Damn it. Okay, he's going to be right on this one. So then I thought, all right, I need to go and ask friends, people I love and trust and respect. I'm going to ask the people out there. And the first one is Jeff. AI sort of worked with this one. Now, Jeff's been a big part of my career. We were chatting backstage. My first DEF CON was DEF CON 5. And Jeff built a home for the weirdos, the curious, the people that generally society would look down upon in a way. He's laughing now, huh? But he built this community. And for the first time ever, when I went to DEF CON, I was like, my God, I found a home. I found a place, the Alexis Park, where you could do whatever you wanted to do. And indeed, the early days were like that. It was also a bit odd. You know, if you've ever been to Vegas in the summer, wearing full latex by the pool is not advisable. I am just warning you. No, I didn't do that. A friend did. But I said to Jeff, like, what are some of your concerns about where we're seeing the internet go? And he feels there's a battle ahead, right? And it's eroding net neutrality. And what he meant by this was you have all of a sudden a lot of corporates deciding where your data is going to go, how it's going to be used, right? The cool things that you can do if you play in their garden. And there's a lot of centralization and data silos happening. And that goes against the nature of how the web was built with Sir Tim. Open, transparent, usable. So I was like, okay, this is interesting. Like, you know, on the one hand, we've sort of got environments that might be secure, but then they're moving away from the fact that the internet is not what Sir Tim wanted. So, okay. So then I thought, right, I'm going to get somebody else, partner in crime who we did a lot of stuff with, Dino Daizovi. This is the best AI one because he honestly looks like an 18th century Lothario. Dino, notoriously well known for a lot of exploitation methods. The Karma attack in 2005 was his. His blood ran with offensive type stuff. But now Dino works on the defensive side. So I was like, Dino, what's the best thing you think has happened in the last 5 years when it comes to security? He was like, the cloud, straight up. The cloud done right. He gave an example. AWS came out with Guard Duty. Guard Duty is beautiful because it actually tells you when you've done something wrong, when you've got a configuration problem. Now, if you compare that to on-prem stuff, such as AD or Exchange, any Exchange administrators in the room? There's one no, because they're probably all drinking and dead, because you can't manage Exchange. But the reality is that the cloud done right, yeah, it actually offers a lot of good security. And I know we've got these age-old jokes of, it's just another man's computer. I'm like, move on, seriously. Good clouds, good security, but here's the problem. We're now back to that data silo. We're back to that sovereign network. And Dino's feeling is the average person has moved more towards a safer zone when adopting the cloud than they would do normally. I was like, okay, that's really interesting. So the next person I wanted to speak to was Davi Ottenheimer. Davi is the VP of Trust and Safety at Inrupt. Inrupt is Sir Tim's new company that's looking at building a better web type thing. And he's done a lot for trust and safety over the years. So it was an amazing chat with him. And his biggest concern was that if we look at CIA, not the agency, the other thing, we've sorted the confidentiality part to a degree. Crypto's good, right? We've nailed that, sort of. We've sorted the accessibility part. The one bit that's really, really hurting us right now is integrity. You go back to Sir Jeremy's comment, yeah, the web has become a battleground. We saw a couple of years ago where fake news became part of the normal mainstream. Well, disinformation has been around for a long time, so PSYOPs. But that integrity part is really, really hard because a core principle of the internet was built around the idea of ships, steam, moving stuff around. And we're not evolving and pushing as many new ideas as we should do. His other concern, ironically, this was before ChatGPT came out, was that, we do need to start talking about ethics of AI. We do need to have something like that. And that's a big concern because as these systems are being built, and as we've seen with ChatGPT, it can do some amazing things. It can build really, really convincing phishing lures. So one of the biggest problems with phishers, which is great from a detection perspective, is that English might not be their first language. So we can detect the problems with the language. Well, ChatGPT just made that really miserable. So from a defensive side, oh God. So are we building the tools that makes it easier for the criminals? I then said, right, I want to talk and look at what Bruce and I would do. Bruce was really an interesting one. And he was like, the reason we're not building secure stuff is because there's no incentive to build secure stuff. I was like, God, you're right. And there isn't. Why would I build a secure web application, firewall, VPN type thing? Because customers are not asking for it. And even if they are, we don't have to give it to them, right? Because, so what if they get breached? We always thought that getting breached might impact a company enough to change their ways. Unfortunately, that just doesn't happen. It's a blip. It's a PR control message. It's a keep your head low, it will go away, and we can go from there. And he also gave me an example, one that resonates with me, is that if we look at pajamas. Now, I've got 2 kids, Los Diablos, they're absolutely killing me. But, they have pajamas. In the UK, there are acts around and regulations of how you can sell pajamas to children. It's called the Nightwear Safety Regulations Act of 1985. I read it. My Friday nights are wild, I tell you. But it basically put about agreements and regulations that say, the stuff can't make your kid turn into a marshmallow on fire. You're like, genius. But we don't seem to have that with a lot of our tools. So Bruce is like, well, it's no longer a tech problem, but an incentive problem. And I was like, okay, this is giving me a lot more background. So the last one is Alex Bloor. He's part of the London Internet Exchange down the road. Think of him as the core fabric. And I said to Alex, like, what do you think has been the biggest shift in the last 5 years from a security perspective? And he was like, CDN networks, content delivery networks. Why? Because we've moved away from the data silo that Jeff's worried about, and we've made it so that even if Netflix sort of burns tomorrow, a lot of the tier 1 ISPs will still have your content that you can watch. And I was like, this is really interesting, because you've now moved away from doing that. And maybe that could be used to do other things like security. So for example, I grew up in South Africa. On the African subcontinent, data is really expensive. What's the first thing that people do not do with their data bundle? Apply security updates. Because an iOS update is what, 700 to a gig? That's an expensive thing. But now imagine you had a CDN at your local base station where you weren't charged to do security updates. Okay, this is an interesting thing that's being built. Then he also looked at BGP. Now, I mean, who here hasn't done a BGP hijack? I mean, hell, it's what you did when you were bored. Well, massive problem. How do you solve that? RPKI. It's now looking at using encryption to sign BGP messages. You're like, okay, wow, so we're actually doing stuff. And all these chats were really good because they gave me an idea of like, you know what? Yeah. 2 fingers up to you, Halvar. We are. We're building a defendable internet, sort of. Then I thought, right, I'm going to take it one step further. Then I started looking at, like, Jeff's comment resonated with me a lot. Gated communities. Now, I grew up in South Africa. I left the UK, went to South Africa during apartheid. Very, very strange experience. But one of the ones that stuck out the most was the incredibly wealthy people didn't like the commoners walking past their road. This was a public road. So what they did was, yeah, somewhere we're going to put 2 gates on the end, one there and one there. Private gates on a public road to stop people walking past their house. And like when you see this for the first time, you're like, WTF? Like, how do you wealth? And for me, that sums up a lot of what we're seeing with the internet today, right? You can have as much security as you want, as long as it's now walled garden. You want secure DNS? Come over to Cloudflare. You want a secure mobile operating system? Come over to iOS, come over to Android, Google Pixel, maybe Samsung, right? You want safe browsing? Google Chrome. You want to set up your own mail server because you don't trust them? Good luck to you. Out of interest, anybody here in the last year try to set up their own mail server with a domain and have other mail servers accepted? 2 people. I bet it didn't go as well as you thought it would be. Because it's really hard today. And for me, that's hard because we did all run our mail servers, right? Because there was no Gmail. I've got one of the very early Gmail addresses, and let me tell you, the spam I get from that is fascinating. But it's like before then, you'd have your own domain, you'd spin up a Qmail server, because ain't nobody got time for SendMail, and you did the kind of stuff. Well, you can't really easily do that today. So you effectively have a safer internet for those who can afford it, because lock-in means security. That's great in the Western world. But I think a lot of people in technology forget that the internet was meant to bring everybody together. So we reckon there's, 6 billion internet users at the moment. There's still a lot more out there. The moment you venture outside the Western world, people that cannot afford a £1,400 iPhone 14, you realize that they don't have that chance of saying, you know what, I want to use the latest and greatest phone from Google. They have to go and buy a cheap Android device that's maybe running Android 8, which has been end of life for a very long time, but it's $150. Which everybody probably thinks, that's not that much, but it is a lot of money. So inherently, they're now using an insecure device that's not supported, which means they're outside of the gate. They're now the commoners that are having to walk around these special gates that all the big players of the internet put up. And I don't feel that's fair. So I'm like, okay, so how do we get around this? And this is where the younger Hacker Daniel be looking at me talking about government and regulation. That's a government agent, by the way, with a pink shirt, with a camo jacket. And I thought, well, actually, there's been a massive shift in the last couple of years, and a good shift. Now, before everybody starts throwing stuff at me, Bitcoin, I would say, would be advisable, but that's tanked, so whatever you want to throw. Regulation stifles innovation, right? Government is not cool. Government people are not cool. And I'm sorry to all the government people here, but you're not cool, right? But the reality is that for the last 20-odd years, we've all been having house parties when mum and dad are away, and we thought we were cool, but unfortunately, we posted stuff all over the neighborhood, and lots of people came, and somebody did something in your dad's sock drawer, which is really disgusting. And mum and dad came home now, and they're like, I'm sorry, like, rules need to be coming down now. The reality is, as much as earlier Daniel would hate this, we do need some form of regulation and bills and acts to clean up our act. Because we can't do it on our own anymore. We tried. We asked our vendors to make stuff in a secure way. Didn't happen. Some did, most of them didn't. We're still reliant on Dave not clicking that bloody email so we don't get owned. And there's actually been a lot of shift in regulation. And I spent a good time on this. As Jeff said, one of my proudest moments for the career is for the country that persecuted me and arrested me, I'm now sitting on a government security cyber board, which I think is just interesting. But we've also seen a big shift at how we look at government agencies. So the first is CISA. For anybody pronouncing it CISA like we all did, no, I was told wrong by Jen, CISA. CISA is really cool, right? Because for once, they're actually quite approachable. They're not your typical government suits. You know, they're made up of us, really people from the industry. They're trying to fix big problems in the internet. And you're like, wow, okay, this is quite approachable. Maybe I could actually work with this. In the UK, we've got DCMS, the Department for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, who I'm also working quite closely with, doing very interesting things. And as a result, we're starting to see the trickle-down effect. GDPR has been around for a while. Anybody here like GDPR? 3, 5. You should love GDPR. Do you know why GDPR is amazing? It finally made companies realize you need to understand what you're doing with that person's data. Because before, nobody cared. I am so sick to death of my data being left on the dirty internet toilet walls. Because that's the reality. Nobody cared about my data. I cared about my OPSEC, my security. But why would a company care about that? GDPR came and it said, you're not dealing this properly. You need to understand how to deal with it. And there was lots of huffing and puffing. But the reality was security went up. Because they had to, because they didn't want to be fined. Again, it's an incentive problem, as Bruce said. All right, so that's working. You've also got a lot of other things. So the US Cloud Act, which is questionable. So the US Cloud Act basically came about because law enforcement wanted access to some data that was held in different data sovereignties, and you needed some better way of doing it. Now, you also have some really bad legislation. And one of them, it's the elephant in the room that I think has got to change, is the UK's online safety bill. It's, the premise is good, right? We want to try and make the internet more secure. The reality is, I don't think they spoke to anybody with a good understanding of how encryption and putting backdoors encryption could be a bad thing, right? And for me, that's where the safety bill fails down. They expect Ofcom to be able to be the regulator to look at how you are typing stuff and stop you putting malicious stuff or bad stuff on the internet. Now, anybody who's ever worked with encryption before knows that that just is never going to happen. So you do have some bad regulation. But for the best part, you have some good ones. I think one of the cool things about some of this regulation is that we're starting to see it trickle down into normal life. One of these is the Cyber Resilience Act. Cyber Resilience Act basically says to a lot of manufacturers, especially IoT, you had your fun, but it's time to make stuff a little bit more secure. And it's kind of a mixture of essential cybersecurity and vulnerability handling requirements. So little things like when you buy a washing machine, there's a sticker that says this thing will not catch fire, which I've always thought quite useful when you have appliances like that. You know, like a toaster exploding is a really bad thing. We need the same thing for IoT. I'm on an obsession at the moment of IoTing at my house with sensors because I'm odd like that. And I want to know that that ESP32 sensor in the kids' room is not going to combust and do stuff. This is where the CE and the Cyber Resilience Act could actually start changing a lot of the ways that we're doing stuff. And part of that is I've got experience with standards. So for 10 years, I've been co-author of the OWASP ASVS standard. And the reason the ASVS standard came about was we were so sick to death of the pen tests that were happening at the time, because they were really bad. Like, nobody knew what a application pen test was. So like, well, let's build it in. Teach people how to build secure applications, and teach people how to test it. And we started to see the results. And we're like, okay, this can actually really work. And then you've also had amazing bills go through. So this is David Rogers. David Rogers has pushed through the Product Security and Telecommunications Infrastructure Bill. It's a big name. And the things that that bill is now looking for is that it's banning default passwords. Great, massive step. It's bringing in the idea of vulnerability disclosure, which for anybody who's ever tried to disclose a vulnerability in a cheap IoT product knows it's almost impossible because they don't care. And it's also giving transparency on software updates. Now, IoT is really interesting. Again, it's an incentive problem. We, the consumers, do not want to pay a lot of money for stuff. We want cheap as chips. The first casualty in that is security. So vendors don't put security in because it's cheap, right? So we have a bit of a thing here where we need to do stuff. The other big shift with government is that we somewhat saw law enforcement become badasses. Like, this is the Dutch police logo. You talk about nation-state APT crews, you ain't seen nothing more than the Dutch when they get going. There's no more smoke on a pancake. It's like, whoa. They are just doing stuff when it comes to criminality, where criminals now know if the Dutch are getting involved, stuff's getting ugly. We're starting to see law enforcement get a lot better, right? And we need that. Last week, the ISMS thing was taken down. That was mostly used for smishing-style attacks. Great, because it impacted a lot of people. Combined law enforcement effort, smack that down, right? We're starting to see a lot of this movement. But out of that regulation, we're also starting to see some changes from a lot of the big tech companies. So for example, Android. Anybody here running Android 13? A couple of people. What's cool about Android 13 is the adoption of memory-safe languages like Rust. So finally, 26 years after Aleph 1 pushed it out, we're starting to see vendors go, do you know what? Maybe memory corruption, memory safety, memory handling bugs aren't exactly a good thing. So if we adopt a more secure language, we can start eradicating big chunks of bug classes. You're like, wow, maybe this is actually starting to happen. So now if I look at all that, I'm like, okay, you know what? Man, Halvar, guess what? 2 fingers up to you, son. We're doing this, we're so close. And then it brings me onto the community. This is awkward. I don't know if we should be using Twitter anymore, or if we should be going to Mastodon, so you do both, and it gets a bit awkward. But for me, this was the community thing, right? The community, I feel, is where we can make the biggest impact. Like I said, at the moment, we're a bit obsessed with Oday, we're a bit obsessed with calc.exe. What we are doing wrong is that for some weird reason, we are arming criminality like never before. And we're doing so with the information we're sharing, which on the one hand is very good. We're doing massive dissemination of campaigns. We're teaching people this is what a bit of malware does, this is what it looks like, here's it in a pirated copy of IDA, you know, everybody's happy, we're all good. The reality is, criminals are looking at that going, that's really useful because you've just given me a free QA session so I can now understand how you're detecting me and how I can bypass that. Now, this is very much a knife story. A knife can be used for good and evil. In this case, we needed a little bit more balance. But one of the bigger problems I've got is seeing the impact of such research. I used to run a company called SenseBurst with Dominic. I like him a lot. And he tweeted this last month saying, listening to a heart-wrenching story from a business owner on what it was like as a business and as a person to experience a ransomware attack. It makes it hard to feel comfortable in unfettered offset releases when you see the human impact of how it's used. I get this is controversial. My world has been offensive for a very long time in the security sense. But the reality is that there's so much money to be made now, we are arming the wrong people. Because you never see the blue side of things. You never see the detection methods. I was talking earlier to 2 colleagues, very, very talented reverse engineering colleagues. We're talking about Patch Tuesday. Patch Tuesday is literally Nerd Valentine Day for people in security research. Because when that comes in, you're excited, and you're getting it, and you're using BinDiff, and you're looking for all the bugs, and you're looking for anything above a score of 8, and you're like, yep, gotta make some money. Microsoft has that power to say, you know what, here's Patch Tuesday. We've done the same thing. Here's the detection strings. We've put that into Sentinel. So if somebody does do this, we're one step ahead of them. This is how you detect them. When threat intelligence companies take the latest campaign, and can I just say, can we stop giving goddamn criminals logos and stupid mascots? They are not nice. Let's make it so that they're not nice. Because by normalizing them, we're normalizing criminality. And I think that's a big thing. So that goes back to, okay, where are we going with the web? And I have to look at Sir Tim Berners-Lee, because the web is his thing, right? And, you know, on the 25th anniversary of the web, he did a TED talk, and I urge you to look at it, where he talked about the need for a Magna Carta for the web. In that he needs and he wants a Bill of Rights for the next 25 years of the web, where the web is open, transparent, and secure. And I think it's that last bit. And I think that's where we as the community can actually start doing stuff. One of the things he's looking at is Solid. So Solid has been around for a while now. The idea behind Solid is that to move away from the data sovereignty thing is that we can control our own pods. We can become our own data custodians. And in doing so, we stop having our data being put on toilet walls all over the internet because we have better control. GDPR is trying to fix some of that, but I think the idea behind Solid is an interesting one. And if you apply it to the context of security, we can also start seeing how that might actually benefit developing countries, countries that don't necessarily have the money for security. So if I look back at the community side, I think Halvar's right. We aren't building a defendable internet, because right now we're favoring the red team over the blue team, and I think that needs to change. And for me, that's where we almost kind of now need balance. We need an equilibrium reshift. I really want to see everybody here do two things over the next 2 days, and this is where I'm going to paint a big target on my back from vendors. We've got a big vendor hall. I would like you to go up to every single one of those vendors and ask 3 very hard questions. 1, what are you doing to make the internet more secure? They're going to come back with marketing stuff. I want you to turn around and say, no, what are you doing in your products? How are you making your products secure? Are you using SAST? Are you adopting SBOM? Do you have a full understanding of your supply chain? What tools are you using? Do you do threat modeling? Ask them these questions, because we as a community should be doing more of this when it comes to purchasing, when it comes to buying. When you see offensive tools come out, ask that person, what are the detection mechanisms you're giving away as well? The more we start normalizing this, the more we make life more miserable for criminals. Criminals that, I hate to break it to everybody, are abusing all of us. Because with the cost of cybercrime going up, that means your bills go up, because companies are going to pass it on to all of us. So that very simple bug right at the start, that cool 0 day that you found, and you pushed it out to GitHub as a POC, somebody's going to weaponize that. So maybe release it as a POC, but release it as detection methods as well. And that makes me come into, finally, a question. Are we in security in the business of solving security? Or are we just here for the ride? So I wanted to thank you very much. Like I said, we've got lots of cool talks over the next 2 days. The review boards spend hundreds of hours, and I am not joking, looking at all these talks. And we're trying to pick the best talks that excites all of us. So enjoy the talks. Go and annoy the vendors. Please just don't say, oh, yes, hell, Daniel sent them. And welcome to Black Hat, and thank you very much.